Hello, welcome to WRUW FM 91.1 Cleveland. You're listening to A Different Drum, where the more you love music, the more music you love. I'm your host, Matt Hook. Today I am joined by composer Kevin Kastning. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Matt.
Hey, this is Kastning's second time on the show. Last time we spoke, we talked about his 2017 album with saxophonist Carl Clements, Even This Late It Happens, record that was on my top 10 list of albums from that year. So that album, he has released 7 new projects, including the focus of this interview, his latest record, Piano 1, a collection of solo piano pieces. To introduce you to his music, here is Construction 1. Alright, so that song you just heard was Construction 1B by Kevin Kastning, who's joining me today via Skype. So, that was a great song. I really loved your use of empty space in that. And this album sees you moving in an entirely different direction than all of your previous work. Can you talk about why you made that change and what kind of events or musical inspiration led you to that change?
Sure. And thanks for the kind words on that piece, Matt. I appreciate it. Honestly, I had never intended to do a piano album. I had done little bits of piano recordings here and there. One of my solo records had one piano piece on it. The album, The Line to Three with Mark Wingfield, I played some piano on that record. And I've always seen piano as kind of a compositional tool, not a performing instrument. I've used it, since I was a child for composing. I don't think of myself as a pianist, but as those recordings started kind of filtering out, several people strongly encouraged me to pursue that and try to do a complete piano project. Shandor Sabo, one of my collaborators, was pretty enthusiastic about it. Mark Wingfield was very supportive of it. And Mike Matheny, who's a friend of mine, was really very supportive and helpful in that. So I feel like those guys know more than me when it comes to music. So I just started sketching out some pieces here and there, and I kind of thought, well, maybe at some point this will kind of turn into a whole project. But it actually came together very quickly, and I had the whole thing recorded in a fairly short amount of time. I think a couple of weeks maybe, and that's kind of the story on how that came to be.
And is this album entirely through composed pieces, or are there also stuff that is improvisation?
It's a little of both. The pieces were just based on sketches, and then I would build off of that when I was recording. So it's to me, it's mostly improvised, but there's still some sort of underlying structural things that were sketched out ahead of time.
Like, what would be an example of an underlying structure that, for example, in that last piece we just heard, Construction 1B?
Mm-hmm. Those opening two chords, the way they move apart, that was kind of the whole concept behind that piece. So I had sketched out a couple of those sort of harmonic structures that moved away from each other, but were still kind of two halves of one larger harmonic construct. And the whole piece just came together out of that.
Gotcha. So I'm just curious also about your songwriting process. I know one of your albums, 11 Rooms with Mark Winfield, was inspired by looking at various paintings while improvising. Did you have any similar songwriting techniques that you used in this album?
No. When I work with Wingfield, we work very hard with each album to make sure we don't duplicate anything we've done previously. So with 11 Rooms, I had proposed to him that we do some pieces based on the paintings of Vermeer, and he really liked that idea. So we picked out, I think, about 10 or 11 of Vermeer's works, and we started just trying to sort of assign different musical elements to elements within the paintings. And then that went on for a few months. And then when we got together in the studio, we just took it from there. So those pieces were really improvised, but yet they were based on some structural elements that we had agreed upon ahead of time. But I think that's the only record we've done like that. And I try to take the same approach with my solo albums. Conceptually, I'll do something entirely different for each one. They're all largely improvised, but again, they may be based on some very, very like germinal type sketches.
Gotcha. And now I want to
I'm not
talk.
sure your question.
Oh, I want to talk about some of your other albums from this year because you released 7, which is just insanely prolific. I'm just wondering, how do you like? Do you like write every day? Like, how are you just this prolific with just putting stuff out on such a consistent basis?
It's funny you say that, because if you would have asked me how many records I've done since 2017, I would have said, geez, 1 or 2. I feel like I'm just not getting anything out there. I've just always been really prolific with whatever I've been working on, composing or recording. I don't know. I feel like I can't write it or record it quickly enough. There's just so much there. And I have more unreleased material than I have released material. So it just, I can't really tell you how it happens, just that it happens.
I guess like all creative work, it always seems to come, at least from some level, from some kind of like the ether, almost, for lack of a better word.
Exactly. I feel like when I'm finished with some of those, I feel like I can't really take credit for them, because I feel like I didn't really write them. They just sort of appeared on their own.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Like, you feel like it's almost not you writing them, it's something else?
I do. You can call it what you will. I feel like it's just God working through and just sort of presenting things. There are times when I'll listen to rough mixes and I don't even remember the pieces. I don't remember hearing them. I don't remember playing them. I don't remember recording them. That happens pretty frequently, actually.
Because there just, I guess, always is that sort of sacred element, especially since so much of your music is improvisatory, and when you're improvising, a lot of times you're not really thinking. So it comes from that, like, you don't really know what it's from, in a way, I guess. Like, do you think that's why it seems there's that sacred element to so much music?
Yeah, it could be. I almost feel like music is some other language that we have access to, but it exists outside of anything linguistic or verbal. So I think there's that communication, that connection that happens with music, but I can't really explain it. I just know that it happens, and I get such a tremendous impact from listening to music. I mean, it's the strongest impact that anything will have on me. For example, Bartok string quartets have a tremendous impact on me, and I think it's that kind of almost sacred communication that's happening in the music. Of course, that's different for everybody. Everybody connects with a different genre or different types of music, but that's the impact it has on me anyway.
Yeah, and especially its ability to cross cultures. Like, I know one musician I've interviewed, Omar Sosa, talked about how he uses music to kind of connect different aspects of the African diaspora, and you connect with a lot of different cultures with your own music, with your collaborations with Sandor Szabo, as well as Balsas Major, because they're both Hungarian musicians, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. So, like,
yeah.
How did you first get in touch with them, and was there any sort of cultural barrier when you guys started playing together?
Not a cultural barrier. Sándor is very fluent in English. Balázs speaks maybe 2 or 3 words of English, and I speak maybe 2 or 3 words of Hungarian. So we don't communicate verbally, but we are absolutely locked in together artistically. We recorded an album last spring on the European tour called Kismaros. That was just a duo record of Balázs and I. But to answer your first question, I met Sándor around 2006. He had heard one of my records and contacted me, and had a lot of questions for me about my music and my playing, and I had always really liked his music and his playing, and there was just like an instant friendship there, and to this day we're very close, both personally and artistically.
And wait, go back to what you were saying about Kismaros, because that's just you and him performing in a duo format, and that
Right.
was oh, excuse me. Oh, keep going. What were you saying?
No, that's all right. Go ahead. Sorry.
And that you said was like you guys weren't even communicating much linguistically. It was mainly musical.
Right. So we were set up in a concert hall for a 2-day recording session with Shandor and Balaji and I. And one of the days when we were just getting sound checked, I had Shandor's the translator. Like I will ask questions to Balaji through Shandor. So I had been listening to the album of John Coltrane's called Interstellar Space, which is a duo record of him and Rashid Ali, which is very intense music. I just love it. And I had the thought, I wonder if I could ever do a duo record with Balaji, because he and I really connect very well. We've done, I don't know, 3 or 4 albums together. We've done a couple of European tours together. So that morning, as we were sound checking, I asked Shandor to ask Balaji if he'd be interested in ever considering doing a duo project. And he thought I meant right now. So he said, yeah, let's go. So all the mics were set up. So we ran through one piece together. And I thought, yeah, that worked. That felt right. So as soon as we were finished, Shandor said, you and Balaji must do a duo record. And I said, yeah, I think I would like to do that. I said, we'll have to talk about scheduling it. And he says, no, I mean right now. You have to record it right now. Don't stop. Just keep going. And we did. And that was the record Kismaros. So all of the pieces on that record was everything we recorded that morning in the order that we performed it. So it's almost like just one nonstop session that turned into that album.
That's incredible. So it was just a 2-day session, just on a whim, just created that music.
Well, we were in the concert hall for 2 days. We recorded that album one morning. By the time we broke for lunch, it was done.
Oh my God! And was that difficult, like working in a duo when he's just a drummer? Because you don't really have anyone harmonically or melodically to play off when you're playing with a percussionist as much as when you're doing something with Sandor, who's a fellow guitarist.
True, but to me, Balaji is much more than just a drummer. He's really an artist. And before we started rolling tape, I said, look, the only way I want to do this is if it's an equal partnership. I don't want like a percussion accompaniment to what I'm doing. I want both instruments to be completely equal partners in this. And he loved that idea. So I was just listening to him really intently. And I know he was listening to me really well. And I think that's what made it work, is that we were really aiming at this music of equals where nobody was accompanying anybody. It was just two completely equal halves. And I think that really comes across on that record too.
Yeah, I mean it does, because you guys, there's definitely just a sense of balance to the record that is just phenomenal. And now, since we're talking about the record, I thought it'd be appropriate to play a track off it. This is Kismaros 6. Okay, so that track you just heard was Gizmaro 6 by Kevin Kastning and Balaji Major off their album Gizmaros. Really fantastic project. Kevin's joining me today over Skype, and that song and the entire album was recorded in a single morning, which is just incredible. So I wanted to ask about your gear for that album. Was that your 36-string double contra guitar?
No, that was the 30-string contra alto guitar.
Gotcha. Because I noticed you had a lot of two-handed tapping and those giant bass notes in the beginning as well, which were just incredible.
Yeah, I had that. That was the instrument that I took for the European tour, so I used that on the whole album because it was the only instrument I had with me.
Speaking of tour, are you having any American tours or any future European tours coming up?
There's no American tours planned, but I will be back in Europe either late this year or early next year.
Also, I'm curious. Why don't you ever tour in the States? Because I know you're in Europe a lot, but you never really seem to do much touring domestically.
Well, I will do usually 1 or 2 dates per year in New York City, but I've just never. I guess the simplest way to say it is that a U.S. tour has never come my way, and the European tours happen kind of on a recurring basis. If I was offered a U.S. tour, I would certainly consider it.
Mm-hmm. Uh, gotcha. It's just something that's just never happened with the draw. Now, I wanted to talk about one of the albums from this year that was actually a re-release you did, The End of Days, featuring classical guitarist Siegfried. I know it was originally recorded in 2002, and why did you decide to re-release it now?
Siegfried and I had recorded together back in the 90s and then into the early 2000s. And that album had been recorded for some radio stations. It had never been released, and it had never been intended to be released. So we had just recorded that just for some use of radio stations that had asked us for some new music. And Shondor had gotten a copy of it several years ago and actually remastered it and said, I really think you should put this out. And I said, well, we'd never really intended to do that. And he said, no, this is one of my favorite albums. You really have to put this out. So I talked to Siegfried about it, and he was interested in doing that. So we did. And it actually has, I think, 4 or 5 pieces on it that were not on the original compilation that were all recorded at the same time. So we were just trying to, I guess, complete our catalog because we haven't recorded together in several years.
Capture that kind of period of time when you guys are collaborating regularly. And why haven't you guys collaborated in the last couple years? Just hasn't happened, or is there any particular reason?
Siegfried's artistic life took a couple of turns, so he's not pursuing the music side of it as much as he was at that time. I'm not saying that we would never record again. We may well, but it would be up to him if his artistic inclinations come back in that direction. We're great friends. We see each other pretty frequently, but we just haven't done anything since, I think, 2005 or 2004, something like that.
Huh. All right. Yeah. All right. So he just decided to focus on artistic mediums other than music.
Right. He's not doing nearly as much music these days, which is totally good for him. But I'm kind of bummed because he had such a unique voice. Like nobody else quite sounded like him. So I hope he gets back into it at some point.
Yeah, I agree with you. He definitely had a very unique style and sound he was playing. And but I guess when he comes back, it'd be interesting to see how that time off pursuing other artistic disciplines affects how he makes music. Because I guess it all comes together in your creativity.
Right. And back then I was just playing 6-string on most things and some 12-string. I think a little bit of fretless guitar, but since then I've moved into the 36-string and the 30-string. So to bring that into our music would be really interesting for me as well.
Yeah, because you've just grown and developed so much as a musician. Like, it reminds me, I listened to that 1988 album, the Kevin Kastning Unit, and it sounded so much like Pat Metheny. I was just in shock. I'm like, and then I guess those elements have always been in your playing, like some of those chord changes that you did the last minute of Kismara 6 kind of reminded me of that very beautiful shimmering sound, but I was like, man, how is this the same guy who's now this 36-string guitar player? And was that the first album you also did with Carl Clements as well?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was. I've been playing with Carl at that time for 2 or 3 years, and we had done a ton of performances in and around Boston. But I think, that's a good question. I think that was the first one we did together.
It's incredible you guys have just managed to stay in touch, and also where you guys both move in like a similar artistic direction. Because it's just so, because what you guys did, like, for example, like if you were to play Even This Late It Happens side by side to Kevin Kastning Unit, anyone would assume that they're just two completely different artists. So I guess that just shows how much you've kind of developed as a person since that time.
It's just a continuous evolution. You know, back then, I'm trying to think, I think that was recorded in 1988.
Yeah.
And I certainly couldn't have envisioned or conceived of the work that I'm doing now back then. So by the same token, I have no idea where I'll be 5 or 10 years from now. I just have to follow wherever the music goes.
I guess if I were to go back in time and tell you in 1988 that you'd be doing this kind of stuff now, what do you think your reaction would be?
I'm sure that if you played for me some of that music back then, I would have no idea what it was. Like I would just think it was some sort of, you know, modern classical or something from ECM that had never been released or something. I don't know. It just, it's not as if back then I was shooting toward doing, you know, these extended guitar family instruments, you know, solo performances. It just evolved into that, and I'm really pleased that it has. I'm really happy with the direction in which everything is going right now.
Oh yeah, it's definitely just a very inventive way. And speaking of you constantly evolving as a person, as I think all human beings should try to strive to, your next album with Sandor Sosbo represents almost a sea change for you. Can you kind of describe that a little bit? Because it's...
Yeah, our next album is called Ethereal 3, and that will be released on April 23rd. I'm on piano on the whole record, and Sandor is doing orchestrations with the piano on the whole record, so there's no guitars on it. So that's a big, like a big change of direction for us. We had it's been well over a year ago when I was recording the sessions for 1766. I had recorded, I think, one little piano piece and sent it to Sandor just to show him something I was working on. And he came back and said, would you record a couple of piano pieces that are each about 4 minutes long? And he specified some kind of harmonic elements in them. And I said, yeah, I could try that. So I did and sent them over to him, and I didn't know what he was going to do with them. But he had been working with some classical symphonic players in Budapest and had created his own set of orchestral samples. And he put cello on those piano pieces. And because I was so involved with the recording of those two solo records on guitars, I had completely forgotten about him. And when we were on tour last year, he played the final versions for me with cello and piano. And at first I didn't recognize what it was at all. And I said, what is that? And he said, those are those piano pieces you sent me. And it was just totally startling to me because I had forgotten that I had recorded them and I didn't recognize them at all. But with the cello parts, they were just beautiful. I mean, the cello parts were beautiful. And that really stuck with me. So we had talked about what we were going to do for Ethereal 3. And he suggested I do some things on piano. And I thought, yeah, I could do that. And then the more I thought about it, I kept thinking about those cello pieces. And I said, well, why don't we do something more in that direction? He said, okay. And then I kept thinking about it. And I said, let's do this. How about if we don't use any guitars on this record? I'll do all piano and you do all string parts. And he said, yeah, let's try that. So I thought it was going to be a very long-term project, that it would just go on for probably a year. But we had it all finished in about 2 weeks. And it just turned out really well, I think. I'm happy with the direction in which it's going. And you're right, it's completely different than anything we've done before.
Yeah. And I guess it's almost like a companion piece to Piano 1, where they're both you exploring a completely different instrument in a new way. With, I guess in this one you have Sandor alongside you to help explore in his orchestral stuff. So had he previously recorded orchestral things like this before, or was this also a completely different experience for him too?
No, this was new for him as well. He's composed things, uh, you know, for chamber groups and orchestral things, but he has not recorded them with samples like this.
Mm.
So I would send him some piano pieces, and then he would put his string parts down on them. And then on some of them, he would say, could you record some piano pieces that are, for example, based around some pentatonic scales? Or he might give me just some sort of vague direction like that. And I might say to him, look, I'm going to do this piano piece, and it's going to have a lot of open space in it. And so we just went back and forth with ideas like that. And it was just really done before we knew it. And it was a totally new direction, new experience for us both. I think it's just a coincidence that it came out after the piano solo record. That wasn't intended. It just kind of happened that way.
Gotcha. But that's cool because like that, especially sample-based orchestral stuff. That's interesting because when you first sent me that one sample from it, I assumed it was a regular chamber orchestra because it sounds very real. Like it sounds real.
Yeah, he did a great job with the samples. He had some really good string players to work with, and the orchestration on it is very unusual. I think he used one violin, 8 cellos, and 1 double bass.
Yeah, that is interesting. Because
it's a beautiful sound.
Yeah, because most of the time you'd expect it to be more on the violin or just more variation, but having 8 cellos there.
Right, but you wouldn't think that when you hear it. It's just such a homogeneous sound.
So, and that album's release date's going to be April 23rd, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like all of Kevin's material, that's going to be out on all major streaming sites, Amazon, all that good stuff. And do you have a CD baby as well that people can find, or listeners can find your music?
Yep, everything is on CD or streaming, but all the CDs are available on CD Baby and Amazon as well.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of your albums, I don't know if this is something that you have a direct part in, but one thing that's always struck me about your work is the album art. Is that something that you pick out or create yourself, or just like tell me about it?
I've been really fortunate to know a lot of fantastic artists and photographers in different countries. I'm very, very interested in art, painting, and photography. I love going to art museums. Whenever I'm in a new city, that's the first thing I'll do. So I've just kind of have this network of artists and photographers that I know. And fortunately, they really like my music and they're happy to work with me. So when a project is just about finished, like what's in kind of the final mixing phase, I'll have a good sense of sort of a mental image of something that would fit the music. And, I might talk to, for example, Chris Friel, who's a photographer in England, but his photos look very much like paintings. Some of them you just wouldn't ever think they were photos. I might talk with Chris and say, I have this project I'm working on and it's kind of in this direction. And then I'll go through some of his work and find things that fit it. So I just feel tremendously indebted to those folks that are out there that I partner with for the cover art.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what's Greatest Records as well, because they've been the record label to release all your material. How'd you first get in touch with them?
This would be a very short story, Matt. That's my label.
Oh. That makes sense how they've managed to release all your material then.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm wondering, because Piano One, is this for the cover of Piano One? Is that a photo that you took?
It is. I had looked at a couple of artists' work that the folks that I know, and I was having a really hard time finding anything that connected with that music. I don't want to say the word represented, but just something that connected with it. And I had some pictures of this hill that's near where I live that I've taken, shot pictures of it in different seasons. And I just happened to stumble across, I'd all but forgotten about them, and just happened to stumble across them one day when the mixes were almost done. And it just kind of struck me like, wow, that the feeling from that hill is very similar to the essence of these pieces. So I used one of those pictures from Winter for the cover, and then the gatefold inside is that same hill, but during a blizzard.
Yeah, 'cause it's a very stunning photo that does reflect the themes of the album a lot. And one thing that I noticed about it is that you have those two kind of trees, and then you have a forest behind them, which creates a very just immediately visually striking image. And what do you think about that photo? Really, like, what about that photo in particular made you think it reflected your pieces?
Those two trees in the foreground that you mentioned are misshapen, but I just love the shape of them. They're not, one leans off to the left and one is kind of shaped like the number 4. I just love that. Like, it's as if nature is kind of becoming sculpture. And then you have this beautiful, homogeneous old New England forest that's just sort of following this gentle undulation of a hill going up, and just the juxtaposition of that with all the snow. I just thought it was a really strong image. I mean, I'm not taking credit for it. It just, all I did was point a camera at it, but just that setting I've always really liked a lot. There's times when I drive by there, I'll just pull over and just sit and stare at it for a while.
Yeah. It's absolutely tremendous. So also I was wondering, the titles on this album as well, I know you you split them into, like, basically almost, I guess 6 sections, where it's like construction 1A, 1B, 1C, and then construction 2A, 2B, and then 3A, 3B, and then component factor 1 and element sector 1. Why did you split them in that way? Was there a method behind that? Like, does all the construction pieces represent like one sort of suite of music?
Almost. The 3 separate constructions are all, so there's 9 construction pieces, but it's really 3 large pieces that are broken down into 3 movements each.
Okay, so like construction 1 is one piece, and then A, B, and C are the 3 movements.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So that's an interesting thing to think about now when I'm listening back to it again. Is that, I guess it's intended for you to listen to 1, 2, and tracks 1, 2, and 3 as one thing, and then 4, 5, and 6 as one thing, instead of as each being an individual piece of something.
Yes, but I also tried to structure it such that each movement can stand on its own. Like, it doesn't sound like it's something that was pulled out of something else, and it's like maybe missing some structural support.
Gotcha.
I hope.
Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Matt, it's always my pleasure to be on your show. I'm very happy to be here, and anytime. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Great. Anyway, this was Kevin Kastning. His latest album, Piano 1, is on all major streaming sites, and his next album, Ethereal 3, with Sandor Sosbo, is going to be released by Greatest Records on April 23rd. And now stay tuned to WRUW for more music.